Toronto is a city of 630 square kilometers, with 158 neighborhoods and more than 3 million people, each with their own story to tell. This is For the Love of TO.
Hi everyone, I'm here with Janet Bannister, a veteran tech investor and entrepreneur located right here in Toronto. She's the founder and managing partner at Staircase Ventures, where she's an active player in Canada's tech ecosystem, investing in early stage companies. Back in 2004, Janet founded one of Canada's biggest success stories and something you will all be familiar with, Kijiji. And before that, she was one of the first employees at eBay in Silicon Valley. Over the years, she's been recognized as one of the most influential women in Toronto, across Canada, and within the investment and tech sectors. Lucky for us, Janet calls Toronto home, and she is our guest today for the Love of TO. Thanks for joining me today, Janet.
It is awesome to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Brad.
I'm thrilled to sit down and to chat about your story, your journey, your hopes and aspirations for the city, and how you got here. And I guess, dropping Kijiji off the top, it's funny, I recently started boxing, and so, which I know we're both cyclists, but if you've never done any boxing, that is a different kind of workout. I discovered all of these muscles that had never been used before, and had a hard time walking for a couple of days afterwards.
Really get you angry.
Well, yeah, I try not to be angry, but it's definitely it's a good stress release. But my point is, I got excited about it. So where did I go to find a used boxing bag?
Kijiji.
I went to Kijiji, and I signed back into my account and started scrolling the pages, and I found one, and I'm going to be picking it up. So
Terrific.
and I guess I kind of have you to thank for that. So Kijiji is something that we're all familiar with. Tell me where that started. What was the idea? How do you put something like that together, and how do you scale it up so that it becomes so ubiquitous with, everybody's experience here in Canada?
Absolutely. Well, so I had worked at eBay in Silicon Valley. So I was fortunate enough to be able to move to Silicon Valley and join eBay in the early days of eBay. When I joined eBay, it was actually mostly a collectible site. So 80 to 90% of the things bought and sold on eBay were collectibles. And I was given responsibility for all the non-collectibles categories. And so things like clothing, home and garden, jewelry, books, etc. And had a great time in Silicon Valley, tripling or quadrupling that business year over year, building a great team, learning a ton. But then in 2004, decided to move back to Toronto, right? And this comes to the theme of, why I love Toronto and why I think Toronto is such a great city. So I spent 4 years living in Silicon Valley. It was great on a lot of dimensions. But I just decided that Toronto was, my husband is Canadian, and we decided that Toronto was where we wanted to live. It's where our family is. It's where we wanted to raise a family. And so we moved back to Toronto. And I moved back with eBay. And the only open role that eBay had at the time was head of product. So basically responsible for the ebay.ca website. And so the first thing I did when I came back to Toronto was I said, okay, let me benchmark how is eBay Canada doing versus every other country in the world. Mm-hmm. And what I immediately saw was that there were a lot of Canadians that were going to eBay, but in terms of the conversion rate from going to the site to actually taking action, Canada was half that of every other country around the world. So we started doing some things on the site in education to try to address that issue.
And why was that? What did you find?
What I realized was that this was not an eBay-specific issue. It was much more of a Canadian issue where Canadians were spending a lot of time online. Interestingly enough, and this, again, was year 2004, but Canadians were spending more time online on a per capita basis than any other country in the world except for South Korea. Sort of interesting. But in terms of actually buying anything online, like e-commerce or whatever, we were half that on a per capita basis versus most other countries around the world. And so I thought, that's really interesting. And what it said to me was Canadians are researching online, they're browsing online, they're shopping online, but they're not purchasing online. And I thought that is a dynamic that I don't think we're going to be able to change in the short term. I think there's a lot of reasons we get into why that is, but I just we're not going to change that. And so therefore we should be thinking about a model that would be more, that's more tailored to the habits of people who are browsing online and transacting in person. And so I actually came up with 4 or 5 different ideas. One of them was to launch an online classified site. And after doing some more research, came up with the idea that we should be launching a classified site in Canada.
Okay. And what is it about a classified site like Kijiji that translates into a higher conversion rate, not just browsing, but, actually going and clicking purchase and doing the deal?
Whereas with classifieds, you're actually looking online, right? You're browse shopping online, but you're transacting in person. Like when you go and pick up
Right.
the boxing bag,
Yeah.
you're actually going in person and you're picking it up from somebody. And that was the thing that Canadians wanted to do. Again, this is, 20 plus years ago. And so habits have changed, but the same dynamics still hold that compared to American counterparts, Canadians do less online shopping. And so the ability to actually go in person. The other interesting thing about Canada is even though we are a huge country with a very small population, we're actually one of the most urbanized countries in the world, judged by what percentage of our population lives in urban centers.
And something like 80% of the Canadian population lives within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But in terms of the urban center thing, if you want classifieds to work, you need people living in the same city. Right. Versus in the US, where you've got a much larger percentage of the population lives in small towns. In those towns, it's much more natural for them to purchase online because there's a lot of things that you cannot purchase locally.
Right. That's very interesting. So you're at eBay, you're doing the ebay.ca. You come up with this idea for online classifieds in Kijiji. What's the next step? Is it fire off the resignation email?
So actually, I went to the folks at eBay in Silicon Valley and I said, hey, we should be launching a classified site in Canada. And they said, well, that's interesting, but Canada's not really a priority. And besides the fact this thing called Craigslist already exists there. But I really like this idea and I believed in it. And so I kept doing some digging around and I found out that eBay was getting ready to launch a classified site in Europe. So I went back to the executives and after, several meetings and going back and forth, I got permission to basically take the same code base that they were launching in Europe and localize it for Canada and launch that. And so we launched that and it quickly became very successful.
Okay. And then branching out from eBay to Kijiji, was that just we're going to go on our own, or was it affiliated with eBay at the time, or how did all of that
it
work?
was absolutely, yeah. So it was affiliated with eBay. But what's interesting, eBay said, Jan, we love you, but if you leave and do this Kijiji thing, we're going to backfill your position and we may not have like a role for you if it doesn't work out. But I think I'm the type of person who I always love to I'd rather try something and do my best and see, even if it doesn't work out, rather than sit around and say, oh, I wonder what would have happened.
Right.
And I believed in this idea. So we launched it. And I mean, so many different lessons. But I think one thing that's interesting is Craigslist existed in Canada at the same time that Kijiji launched. And Craigslist and Kijiji, I mean, they're basically the same product. And in anything like a marketplace, it's, the first mover has a tremendous advantage because in a marketplace, buyers want to be where the sellers want to be where the buyers are. And so whoever has the most volume tends to continue winning. And so, there were some people, some executives at eBay who said, well, maybe, Jana, maybe you can be successful with Kijiji in Canada because Kijiji is going to have nicer colors and a nicer user interface. And my thinking was on the day that we launched, like we are not going to be able to meet the needs of buyers or sellers as well as Craigslist. Right. They got more selection. If you're looking to buy something, you're going to see more selection on Craigslist. If you're looking to sell something, you're probably going to sell it faster on Craigslist.
More buyers. Right.
So, and we're not going to be able to win just because we've got a nicer user interface. I mean, they meet the fundamental need better. And so my strategy was to say, hey, no, and we're not going to go head to head with Craigslist. We're going to go against people who don't even know that Craigslist exists and who are using garage sales and who are using newspaper classifieds. And so what we did was we decided to target new families.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, because we thought new families, if you looked at who was on Craigslist, new families really were not on Craigslist. It was mostly young single males. And we thought, okay, young families, they're going through so many changes. They don't know about Craigslist. They
need baby gates for 2 years, but then not afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they need like little bikes 1 year and then medium-sized bike
Right,
and
right.
different-sized bikes and skis, and
Oh,
they need a
brilliant.
new minivan, and they need a new dog, and so that's what we targeted, and we were able to significantly grow the market.
It was family focused.
Yeah.
Okay. And when I think about like resale markets, and I'm drawing on the experience of young dad and a 2 and a 4 year old. So we are literally doing this right now. We just listed baby gates. And Facebook Marketplace has now emerged as a place where a lot of people are doing these sorts of transactions as well. So is it when you see big entrants like I guess Meta coming into the space, is that really a recognition of the success and recognizing that there's more space for people to play in here?
Yeah, so I left Kijiji about 14 years ago.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, I won't comment in terms of like their strategy and what they've done in the interim 14 years. Uh, but yeah, I think the key message as you look at Facebook's growth is even though a company may have the advantage, in terms of the network advantages, you always have to be innovating if you want to maintain the leadership position.
Right. And so you come out of Kijiji, and at some point you decide, I want to support other founders on their journeys. And, that was, I'm sure, part of the inspiration for Staircase Ventures. But tell us a little bit about how that came to be, what it looks like. And again, like, I think the idea of putting a fund together to place bets on people who are trying to do big things, that's pretty intimidating. That's a big move. How'd you end up there?
So 11 years ago, I joined a firm called Wheel Ventures, which at the time was one of the largest, most active early stage investors, a firm based in Montreal. And I joined, I was the first partner hired outside of Montreal. And so I was obviously in Toronto and really building out our investments in Toronto. So I fell in love with venture capital and specifically fell in love with investing in and working with entrepreneurs and helping see them grow as leaders and helping their businesses grow. And so I was with Wheel Ventures for 8 years. I was the promoted to managing partner there. And then 3 years ago, I left Wheel Ventures and I started my own fund, which is Staircase Ventures.
Mhm. And so you had seen it, in your previous job. What what sort of, gap was there where you said, "I need to step in and do it myself with Staircase versus doing it with others?"
So the biggest gap that I found, and this is what really got me excited about launching my own fund, is I thought what's interesting is virtually every early stage investor will agree with the statement that the most important success factor in an early stage company are the founders. Right? It's the founders. There's never a straight line to success. There's always going to be challenges. And it's do the founders have the skills, the vision, the hustle to overcome those challenges and see it to success? And yet, even though everybody will say, yeah, the founders are the most important success factor, if you ask most venture capital investors, how do you add value post-investment? They will all talk about how they add value in terms of things like, oh, we help them, find customers, we help them hire people, we help them build the business.
Right.
And it's sort of business 101 is, hey, you figure what the key success factors are and you focus on making those things right.
Right.
So I said, okay, I want to start a venture capital fund that, yes, we're going to help all our founders find customers and hire people and everything like that. But we are going to put an unparalleled support in helping to grow the founders, helping them to learn and grow and develop and scale themselves as quickly as they're scaling their business and also help them show up their best every day. And so on that, we have a 5-pillar plan where we do things such as pay for executive coaching, we pay for peer support groups. We did a partnership with Cleveland Clinic Canada to give them confidential health and wellness counseling. We have parenting support, just a complete plethora of benefits to help them perform their best.
And in the sort of founder community, is that something that's overlooked because you're dealing with the demands of a startup and putting things together and sort of health and wellness or even personal growth and development, executive coaching? You're passionate about an idea, right? So you're seized with the idea of whatever you're trying to do and start your business. Those sort of personal things can be pushed to the side.
I think so. I also think that a lot of my philosophy comes from athletics. So as you mentioned at the beginning, we're both cyclists, and I was a competitive long distance runner, competitive triathlete. And so a lot of my world vision is viewed through that lens. And so, you think about an athlete. If an athlete wants to go to the Olympics, they're going to get a coach.
Right.
Right. If they're serious about improving, they're going to get a coach. And they're going to surround themselves with teammates that inspire them, that they can confide in, that they will push them when they're having an off day. Right. And so that was the sort of the thinking, again, executive coaching peer support group. But then again, if you're an athlete, it's not just about all the training you do. It's also about how are you going to show up on race day. Right? How do you show up? And if you don't have the energy, if you haven't slept well, if you haven't eaten well, you're not going to show up and perform your best. So, that's where sort of the other things around health and wellness and family support and making sure people feel supported comes in. And so, yes, I would say it is related to entrepreneurship with high intensity, hard work. But I would actually argue it's applicable to anybody who's trying to be the best at what they're doing, that you've got to always be thinking about those two things. You've always got to be thinking about how am I getting better every day? Who am I surrounding myself with? And how do I make sure that I'm showing up my best every day?
I think about that in the context of the city as well. The steps that we need to take, the things that we need to do to unlock Toronto's potential. Because there's so much potential, there's so much talent, there's so many resources here, and yet it doesn't necessarily feel like we're showing up best version of what the city could be or firing on all cylinders. Before we get into that, though, just closing the loop on Staircase. Is it like Dragon's Den where people are showing up at your door and pitching you, here's my idea, like you should invest and you can take 20%? Or are you actually researching and seeking out specific sectors and different people that are doing interesting things? How does that dynamic actually work when it's not on television?
So I think the biggest thing that is very different is it's not antagonistic.
Okay.
My sort of one of my fundamental underlying beliefs is that the best founders will have their choice of who they work with. And if you want to be partnering with the best founders, you need to be their investor of choice. And so you're not sitting there throwing pot shots at them, besides which I would never do that because I have so much respect for every entrepreneur.
Right.
But it's much more collaborative. Let me understand your business. What do you think about this? The decision is made over a significant time period
Right.
where you're both really getting to know each other. And I would say we go in there, we do a lot of research and have thoughts around where the market is going and where the tech market is going. But then we're also very open to ideas that different entrepreneurs come to, because I think, the vision has to come from entrepreneurs. And, people will come up with you and saying, oh, wow, I never really thought about that industry. But that's really interesting. For instance, we invested in a company that does software for the oil and gas industry. Well, I didn't know anything about the oil and gas industry, but once I met this founder who I thought was really strong, and I learned all about the industry and some of the challenges, and then I thought, okay, can see how they can build a big business here.
Right. And so you're not partial to any particular industry. You're just partial to good ideas and good people who are going to work hard and then can benefit from the support and things that you're bringing to the table through Staircase.
Absolutely. I would say we do technology. So it's business to business technology, software technology.
Is there anyone that ever comes forward and doesn't talk about AI anymore? Or is everything always going to be AI helping business to business level up and increase capacity, production, efficiency?
I think everything has to be AI, but it doesn't necessarily it has to have some component of AI. At least they've got to be talking about how they are using AI to improve the efficiency of their operations or to improve the effectiveness of what they're doing.
So you just referenced somebody that you're working with that's in the oil and gas sector. Are they based here in Toronto or
Oh,
something?
they're actually based in Calgary. I thought about
Well,
that.
no. So, but my follow up is, where are we on the map in terms of startups, tech sector, even founders who are trying to build something? Is Toronto destination number one in the country? Are we where we need to be? Are we holding our historical positioning? What does that look like right now? Are things more disparate because you can build it or do anything anywhere now, especially when, post pandemic, going to work is not necessarily a thing for everyone. What's your thought on Toronto and the sort of startup ecosystem?
So Toronto is definitely, by any of the metrics that you look at, the leader in Canada. I mean, the largest city in Canada in terms of tech, right? In terms of if you measure it based on number of people employed in the tech industry, number of tech startups, number of dollars invested. Like Toronto, I mean, not surprisingly, it's the largest city.
Right.
I definitely, though, don't think about it as a competition. I think, versus other cities in Canada, I think Canada as a whole has to work to elevate its game. I think what's interesting is I think Canadians and Torontonians as well, or maybe sometimes they don't recognize how good they are.
Uh,
And I feel that there's a lot of people in Toronto and Canada who sort of say, oh, we're not good enough and this isn't this. I go down to Silicon Valley and I talk to the investors there, and they love to invest in Canadian and in Toronto tech companies.
oh, that's great.
And,
What do they like about it?
what do they like about her? They like the fact that the companies built in Toronto, the number one thing they will say is amazing tech talent.
Yeah.
Second thing they will say is they are building companies that last. They're building, the people in Canada the employees are much more loyal. They work versus, in Silicon Valley, they'll jump ship to a new company if they think they can make more money elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And just that they're building really solid, sustainable companies.
And when you talk about the tech people being super strong on the tech, is that a product of like University of Waterloo, University of Toronto, like our institutions here? Or do you think it's equally the people who are here and the mentorship and the learning that happens, organically or structured back and forth?
So I think about the talent is twofold in terms of sort of where the raw material is. It's homegrown and it's immigrants, right? And we have, these stats better, but I think 50% of the population of Toronto was born outside the country.
Yeah, 51.
50.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, we've got a lot of amazing talent, engineering talent, technical talent that was born elsewhere that's come to Canada, that's trained elsewhere. Then we also have amazing world-class universities, right? University of Waterloo, University of Toronto, University of Montreal. I know that's not in Toronto, but, people still go there and then come back to Toronto. And, it's just, and as well as other universities. And so you've got this amazing tech talent. And then you add to that the level of, you add mentorship and experience. I sometimes say about tech, in order to build a vibrant tech ecosystem, you need three things. You need talent, you need ambition, and you need capital. And I think we've got the tech talent in spades. What's exciting is we're getting more and more ambitious as founders, as the Canadians see other companies being successful. And then we are getting more talent. I would say, more capital. There's still a bit of a shortage of capital. But we're working on it.
And if we want to continue to attract the talent, foster the ambition and the capital that's needed to unlock that, what do you think cities like Toronto need to focus on to be a destination for those three things?
So I think, the question, I would say just in general, my attitude is entrepreneurs, the best entrepreneurs are hungry, they are driven, and they will not let obstacles get in their way. So I sort of don't look to government and say, hey, government, you need to really, do A, B, and C so that we can have a strong ecosystem. I'm like, just let's go overcome.
Right.
That being said, I would say there are a couple of things. First, I would say you want Toronto to be a place where people want to live. And so to me, and I've seen this data, some of the issues around Toronto are price of housing, traffic, and safety. And when I look at, I mentioned I've been in VC for 11 years, and I think I worry about the city's ability to continue to attract top technical talent, because I don't think we're as great on those three measures as we were 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Some people talk about those challenges, whether it's affordability, safety, traffic congestion, transit reliability. All of those things have sort of, it feels like they moved in the wrong direction kind of over the past 10 years or so. If we're trying to sort of combat that, if we're trying to arrest that decline, is there a role for leveraging some Canadian innovation? I'm thinking tech innovation. Like, are there solutions out there when it comes to housing or congestion management or performance and reliability on transit that maybe the city of Toronto could be looking at investing in, being a customer for?
I think in general, so yeah, absolutely. I think those three things. I think that in general, whether you're talking municipal, provincial, or federal government, as well as Canadian companies, could buy a lot more of Canadian tech. That's probably one of the most significant things that I think could really drive the needle. And, we invest in early stage technology companies. And the conventional wisdom is don't even try selling to Canadian companies or Canadian government. Just go to the US and sell to Americans because they make a decision faster and you get the sale faster and you're just going to build your business so much faster. And I think that's worrisome for me in terms of for a city like Toronto who needs to solve problems, for our Canadian companies that we want to be competitive against their American companies, and they are not buying these technical solutions that could help them be more competitive.
Yeah, like the state of Louisiana is a better customer for some of our startup tech companies than, the city of Toronto or the government of Ontario.
Exactly.
Right.
And what that means is the city of Toronto and the government of Ontario is not benefiting from those technical solutions that could help their cities or the provinces run more efficiently. And so, who pays the price? The citizens.
It's funny, I'm thinking about where we started in Kijiji, and you were talking about the different dynamic of purchasers here in the Canadian sort of country, where they will do a lot of research online, but at that time, whatever, 20 something years ago, there was a risk aversion to actually making the transaction. They wanted to go and kick the tires, the proverbial or literal tires. They wanted to go do that transaction in person. So there was a sort of, sounds like a risk aversion
Yes.
to doing this that was different than in the US. Coming full circle and thinking about procurement in the Canadian context, governments at all levels, is there a risk aversion in our procurement that sets startups or new businesses at a disadvantage because we want to see it up and operating in 30 different markets around the world before we have a level of comfort to go and make that purchase ourselves?
Absolutely. And I think it's not just, hey, we want to see it up and running, but it's like, oh, well, let us think about this for 4 months before we make a decision on whether we should be buying it. And then when we make the decision, let us run the pilots for 6 months to make sure that it actually works and it's not going to have any harm. And then maybe we'll think about gradually rolling it out.
Right. So having feds, province, cities, sort of park some of that aversion and realize that actually the role that we could play in supporting tech is to be a customer, is to be a backer, is to be in early. You cannot overstate the advantage and the significance of, a major government contract early on in a founder's journey.
Absolutely. But I would say that I don't think, and there has been talk at the federal government, hey, open procurement. I mean, really, there is a very small percentage of tech startups that could sell to the government.
Right.
Like, yes, there are, and that can be a massive difference maker to companies like we talked about earlier, Myovision, based in a Canadian tech company that helps drive traffic lights. And
Right.
that, like, for them, a major difference maker. But most tech companies are not selling to the government. Like, the government is just not a potential customer. They're selling to banks, or they're selling to small, medium businesses, or they're selling, the lawyers. Take your pick.
But is that sort of mutually reinforcing in that they know it's so impossible to work with government? So they just say, we don't need to come up with product offerings for a customer who's never actually going to click purchase. So they're not necessarily directing the innovation or the talent or the thinking to those types of problems, because like if your customer, it's going to be like pulling teeth to try and get them to transact, then maybe it's literally easier to work with the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. It is partially that, but it's also partially just in the scheme of what the government can buy. It's relatively small relative to all the different companies, right? I mean, whether it's, construction tech or fintech or property tech. I mean, I know the government's own buildings, but I'm thinking more technology focused on real estate companies.
Right.
There's a lot of different industries and verticals out there. Um,
Fish where the fish are.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. But there is definitely something, as I said, for some companies though, selling, and it could be a massive difference maker. But I'm just saying it's not the only thing. It's
Right.
not the only solution.
You chose to come back to repatriate, to build your life here in Toronto, not in California, as beautiful as California can be. Um, what do you love living? What do you love living in Toronto for? What's the biggest thing for you?
For me, so I'm a big outdoors person. Like I love to run, I love to cycle. We have a great ravine system, right? It's a great park system. We have houses with front lawns. Now, sure, you know what? It's expensive, absolutely. But like the amount of greenery in our city, if you compare that to something like, compare it to San Francisco, houses just don't have front lawns. You don't drive down the streets and see trees. Like it's very different in that way. And they don't have as extensive as park system. Now, sure, they're on the bay and you can run along the water, but I love the fact the park system, overall, we talked about safety. Yeah, sure, you know what? We need to do something more about safety. But compared to most American cities, it's a safe city. Um, and I think I love the Canadian values.
Right.
Right. And I think that was, just the Canadian values of how we treat other people, of acceptance, generally, of respect, politeness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been a tolerance and an element of community, and especially in the city of Toronto, which is often characterized as the city of neighborhoods. You
Yes.
have that neighborhood dynamic, or
That's right. Yes.
sometimes we have that neighborhood dynamic, and I think we're out in the East End, of course, and that was actually what attracted us to our neighborhood. Is we pulled up on a Thursday night, hit the subway station, came up to Danforth, and saw a market taking place on a Thursday night, and the sun setting on Danforth in the west, and all these young families and music and a farmer's market, and just very quickly it felt like this was something we could be a part of, something that's bigger than just us, and really lay down some roots in the neighborhood. So and you have that story across Toronto.
Exactly. Like we have a community, they have a fair this Saturday in May, and we've been involved in helping organize it. And it just, brings people together. And I love that.
Um, I want to leave it there, Janet, but I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights and your journey on our show, For the Love of TO. And we'll have to get out for a ride. Maybe we'll hit up the Ravine Network across Toronto, because it's been pretty hot here lately, and finding a little bit of shade and cooling off in the ravine is always great. Thanks for joining us.
That would be great. Brad, thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me today.
We'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks.
This is For the Love of TO.